The Denver Broncos dropped to 2-2 after a road loss against AFC West division rival the Las Vegas Raiders. The Broncos also lose Javonte Williams in the second half, and there's some concern about the extent of his injury. What does it mean for the Broncos, and how come the Broncos let things get away from them in the second half with Josh Jacobs? You get that and much more on today's brand new Locked On Broncos post-game report.
You are Locked On Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What's up, Broncos country? Welcome back into a brand new episode of Locked On Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you so much to everybody in Broncos country for tuning in and making Locked On Broncos your first listen of the day, every single day, free and available everywhere you get your podcast in audio format, or whether you watch us on YouTube. Do us a favor, hit that subscribe or that follow button so you never miss out on a day's worth of Denver Broncos news, content, coverage, and more from the South Stands to the end zone. I'm your host, as always, Cody Roark, Broncos reporter for Mile High Sports, joined alongside, as always, by my co-host, Sayre Bedinger, site expert, predominantlyorange.com. Unfortunate news for Broncos country as the Broncos lose to the Las Vegas Raiders. The Raiders get their first win of the season at home against a Broncos team that is still trying to figure out their identity, going through the ups and the downs, and not to mention just a little bit of a letdown in the second half for this Broncos team. But the bigger story, not only just did the Broncos lose to the Raiders, they also lose Javonte Williams in the second half, and there is concern about the extent of his injury. Sayre, my friend, obviously not the post-game recap that we wanted to be bringing here for Broncos country, who was hoping for a win. A lot of missed opportunity here once again for the Broncos.
Yeah, same story, different week, isn't it, Cody? I mean, we're talking about penalties. We're talking about, unfortunately, a fumble from Melvin Gordon in this game. We're talking about just shooting yourself in the foot, constantly the same story over and over again, it feels like, for this Denver Broncos team. Although at this point, they are 2-2. Let's just look at things the way that they are right now. They're 2-2, got a quick turnaround against Indianapolis on Thursday. You don't really have any time to be upset about this loss. We can talk about it, but at the same time, like you mentioned, there's a bigger story going on here than the final score of this game against the Raiders. We'll get to play the Raiders again at some point. There's, however many more games left this season, 13 more games yet to be played. The bigger story, like you mentioned, Javonte Williams going down with the knee injury, that could have a significant ripple effect on the offense, which in the first half, Cody, to me, the offense was cooking. I mean, we saw the rust we ordered, the chef was in the kitchen in the first half. So to me, I mean, the biggest issue right now is Javonte Williams and that knee injury.
Well, I like I said, being in the locker room post-game, Javonte was on crutches, and right now the prognosis, we do not know. Broncos head coach Nathaniel Hackett said that he'll get an MRI on Monday to undergo the full extent of the injury, but the fear right now is that it's a pretty serious knee injury, which is a tremendous blow because it happened on the very first play of the Broncos' second half offense. And so when Javonte went out, the Broncos offense went with it. Even though the run game wasn't going, losing Javonte was huge for this Broncos team. And, I think it was just an accumulation, right? Because when we look at the run game, Javonte was getting a majority of the workload. Melvin Gordon comes in for his first carry. In his first carry, he's rumbling. He falls forward. The ball pops up right into Amik Robertson's hands, who runs it all the way back, 68 yards for a touchdown. And that right there, I felt like, Sayre, that was the back-breaking moment of the game. And once again, I know we addressed this last week and coming into this week, that for Javonte, and Melvin, like, the ball security is a huge thing, but for Melvin, 3 fumbles through the first 3 weeks. Now, week 4, another fumble. So 4 fumbles in the last 4 weeks. And fans were telling me in my replies after the game that dating back to last season against the Chiefs, 5 fumbles in his last 5 games. And Melvin was emotional after the game. He stood at the podium and met with all of us media people there. And look, it was tough. He answered, he said, it's my job to protect the football, and I didn't do that, and I've got to do it. And, I tell you what, he was really down, and it was a hard subject. But, at the end of the day, it's very tough because, like I said, Sayre, Melvin Gordon, his replies on Twitter, Instagram, whatever it may be, are going to be the most toxic, negative stuff. Love Melvin as a human being, but, as a football player, it was a rough day for him. And, I applaud him for meeting with the media, but once again, fumbles are an issue with him, and it's something that is very concerning for the Broncos and Broncos country going forward.
It's a major concern, honestly, Cody, and I want to try to talk about it as though Melvin were sitting in this, podcast with us, because like you mentioned, he is a human being, and it's easy to get caught up in the moment. I went through and deleted a bunch of my tweets of super harsh emotional responses during the game about Melvin Gordon, and I would encourage Broncos country to just be mindful of the fact this guy is a human being. At the end of the day, it is just football, but at the same time, you're right. We've got to be accountable to the things that happen on the football field, don't we? And it was 10-10 at that point in the game. The Broncos offense was rolling, and they felt like, it felt like they were kind of unstoppable at that point. Not that the running game wasn't super balanced, but Russell Wilson was finding his groove. He was hitting receivers, spreading the ball around. The Broncos had punched it in the red zone, and it just felt like the momentum had shifted back their way. And Melvin Gordon had not played up to the point that he got this carry where he fumbled the ball. So instead of the Broncos potentially going up 13-10 or even 17-10, now all of a sudden they're down 16-10. It was a critical point in the game because it affected everything else throughout the whole rest of the course of the game, momentum wise, and it just shifted things around, and the Raiders were able to kind of stay in the game when maybe at that point the Broncos could have kind of taken the bull by the horn, so to speak, and really put things in their court and put themselves in control of the tempo and the pace of the game. Instead, it was the Raiders that were able to do it. Yes, the Broncos did answer back with a touchdown of their own afterwards, but it's not like it was no harm, no foul sort of a thing after the Melvin Gordon fumble. It was a critical juncture of the game. And I think, to be honest, like, can you really trust Melvin when he's on the field right now if you're the Broncos coaching staff? I think we'll talk about this later, but they may not have any choice here with Javonte Williams being injured.
That is a big question going forward. And as you mentioned, too, in the third quarter, the Broncos had 19 total yards of offense in the third quarter alone. And there were several situations they were backed up. I do want to highlight some of the things, as you mentioned, Sayre. Cortland Sutton, Jerry Jeudy, KJ Handler coming up with a big 55-yard catch. Russell Wilson running it in from 3 yards out, calling his own number to give the Broncos some life to make it 25-23 in the fourth quarter. But they could not stop a Josh Jacobs rushing attack. And we'll talk about that coming up here in just a moment. Broncos country, where did things go wrong with the Broncos defense, and how can they bounce back against a run-heavy offense with the Indianapolis Colts? We'll get to that coming up here in just a moment. But before we do that, let me tell you about Prize Picks, the sponsor of today's episode, Lockdown Broncos post-game report. And Prize Picks is daily fantasy sports done right. And with the Prize Picks app, you choose 2 to 5 players that you're focused on heading into the week. And these players, they'll have a projection that's set by Prize Picks, and you simply choose whether or not that they will have more or less than their Prize Picks projection, which you could allow you to win 10 times your money on any entry today. There's no competing against other people. It's just you versus the projections available. Download the Prize Picks app or go to prizepicks.com to sign up and play daily fantasy sports. First-time users can receive a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with promo code Locked On. If you deposit $100, Prize Picks will give you $100. If you deposit $50, Prize Picks will give you $50. Don't forget to enter promo code Locked On as sign up for an instant deposit match up to $100. The Broncos' run defense really struggled in Sunday's loss to the Las Vegas Raiders. Once again, Josh Jacobs having a big game against the Broncos. How do they respond? First off, thank you so much to everybody in Broncos country for tuning in, making Lockdown Broncos your first listen of the day. Win or loss, Sayre, Bedinger, and myself, we have you covered on your favorite audio podcasting platform or whether you watch on YouTube. We promise to bring you through everything, every single day, all year long, everything related to your Denver Broncos. Sayre, the second half, we talk about how rough it was from just the injury side of things, losing some key guys, but also just Denver defensively, once again against Josh Jacobs. He had a career-high day against the Broncos, and he really got their rushing attack out of the slump that they've been going through the first couple of weeks of the season. Your initial thoughts on the Broncos' defensive struggles against Jacobs, and look, Jonathan Taylor, I know he rolled his ankle in Sunday's game, but he's probably going to play, and he's expected to be, a guy's going to get a heavy workload once again against the Broncos on Thursday Night Football. Your thoughts on Jacobs?
I hate to say we told you so. If you listen to the crossover episode this last week, we talked about this with your boy Q about the fact that Josh Jacobs seems to become prime Edgerrin James, or I said Ricky Williams on Twitter because 90s kid right here, you know what I'm saying? But he looks unstoppable when he's out there on the field against the Denver Broncos, and I don't know what it is. I don't think you can just chalk this up to the Raiders-Broncos rivalry or anything, Cody. It seems like there's something going on when Josh Jacobs is playing against Denver. Like, did they pass on him in that draft? Or I'm trying to think back to to all the different things that may have factored in, but he certainly runs well against Denver, and he's hard to take down for them. I mean, he made a lot of guys look bad out there in terms of their tackling technique in this game, and certainly helped bleed out the clock. There was 7 minutes left after Russell Wilson engineered that touchdown drive that you mentioned in segment 1, where he called his own number and ran the ball in. There were more than 7 minutes on the clock, and I was just sitting there thinking to myself, oh boy, all right, who's going to get the big sack on Derek Carr? Who's going to get the big, PBU? Is it, who's going to get a turnover or something? And everything just seemed to be going the Broncos' direction. At that point, the momentum had once again shifted. And then here comes Josh Jacobs, like you mentioned, a career best 144 yards rushing, 2 touchdowns, 5.4 yards per carry. It was just a brutal scene to watch. It was like one of those things where you could feel the good coming, and then all of a sudden Josh Jacobs just rips the rug out from right underneath your feet, right? That's kind of how it felt.
Well, in this game too, what's going to be lost, Sayre, is one of the key matchups we talked about that we were excited to see. Patrick Surtain versus Davante Adams. And Davante Adams wasn't getting much. He had a couple of catches on Surtain. Nothing too big, though. And then the Raiders in the second half started moving him inside the slot and getting him across the field, isolated away from Patrick Surtain. And there's a variety of different things that I feel like impacted this matchup. But kind of going back to your point here, let's take a look. The Raiders offense had 25 total first downs in Sunday's win against the Broncos. 14 of them were by rushing attempts there. They were able to move the chains for a first down on 14 rushing attempts, 14 times in this game. That right there speaks to a little bit of an issue. And the Broncos' defense against the run has been pretty good coming into this matchup. But I also feel like what's not being talked about enough, maybe a little bit of an underrated factor of it, when the Broncos have gone nickel so far this season, Sayre, they've taken a linebacker out and they've put an extra defensive lineman in. However, part of me wonders if that changed with P.J. Locke's injury. He got a concussion on the very first play of the game on kickoff and was out. I wonder how much that impacted the Broncos' game plan, because against heavy run teams like San Francisco and the Houston Texans, we saw the Broncos throw in an extra down lineman, have one inside linebacker in on the game. That, to me, I think was a huge question, and it's something that we'll have to find out coming into Thursday's matchup, what they decide to do. But I definitely bummed out. There was that one play too, right? You mentioned a big rushing thing that kept that 7 minutes on the clock going. The Raiders had a 3rd and 6, and the Broncos had complete man coverage. They locked up. Derek Carr got to the outside on the play that Randy Gregory injured his knee and was able to run for a first down. That right there was very crucial. Not only just backbreaking for the defense, but you lose Randy Gregory in the process, and he'll undergo an MRI on Monday as well. We'll find out the prognosis of him probably on Monday. We'll do an updated show here, Lockdown Broncos, for everybody in Broncos country. But too many missed opportunities, Sayre, and just once again, you look at the loss, it stings, but there's also things that you can build on defensively. And unfortunately, it's not going to be talked about enough because it's a loss. But man, I tell you what, once again, hats off to Patrick Surtain. I thought he played a phenomenal game, lights out, and he was getting more praise on Twitter from a multitude of dudes from around the NFL, former Broncos, really great cornerbacks that have played this game before as well. Just unfortunate it gets overshadowed in this loss.
And he deserves all the praise. I mean, you watch him play out there, like I've said before, and I think you and I agree on this, you just kind of have a peace of mind, right? When he's out on the field and the ball's getting thrown into his coverage, you expect good things to happen for the Broncos, and we saw that on a number of occasions. Of course, Davante Adams had his moments, but really, Cody, it felt to me like it was when exactly what you mentioned, when the Raiders kind of found ways to match him up against the Broncos. They identify zone coverage, and they get him the ball in a favorable matchup to make plays. He made that one play after the catch that had absolutely nothing to do with Pat Surtain. So, and of course, you'd like to see the Broncos be able to respond. But again, the domino effect of different things happening throughout this game, the P.J. Locke injury on the opening kickoff, that did affect, I feel, the Broncos personnel. So we'll see how they adjust moving forward. Obviously, Indianapolis has some playmakers in the passing game, specifically at the tight end position beyond just Michael Pittman Jr., but Jonathan Taylor, I'm sure, will be involved as well. So the Broncos are going to have to make quick adjustments here going into this short week against the Colts.
Hey, short week blues are upon us, but you know what? That means Locked On Broncos has you covered all throughout the week. More recap of the fallout of the Broncos-Raiders game from week 4. In preparation, a little bit of a preview for Thursday Night Football when the Indianapolis Colts come to town. But coming up here in just a moment, Broncos country, we talk about how these injuries that the Broncos have sustained in week 4 in the loss to the Las Vegas Raiders could impact them both in the short, the intermediate, and the long term, especially with a short week ahead Thursday Night Football. We get to that coming up here in just a moment. But before we do that, let me tell you about Built Bar, the sponsor of today's episode, Locked On Broncos. And if you haven't tried Built Bar Puffs yet, you are depriving yourself of one of life's greatest joys. And guess what? That is a brand new flavor. Ready? It's delicious, indulgent cookie dough covered in chocolate. That's right. Built has done it again. So let me introduce you to your new favorite, the Cookie Dough Chunk Puffs. They have a light and chewy texture, real cookie dough chunks, and of course they're covered in 100% milk chocolate. All of the joys of eating cookie dough without the hassle of making it. Plus, it's healthy for you. They contain 160 calories and only 15 grams of protein in it. So run to Built.com to snag a box for you and the family today. It'll be the perfect treat, or you can find a really good hiding place and just hoard them for yourself. Make sure you check it out by going to Built.com. Use promo code LOCKEDON15 and get 15% off your order today. Once again, promo code LOCKEDON15 gets you 15% off your order at checkout. As the Broncos transition to a short week ahead against the Indianapolis Colts, they'll have to deal with some injuries that they sustained in week 4 in the loss against the Las Vegas Raiders. Broncos country, thank you so much for tuning in, making Locked On Broncos your first listen of the day, every single day, free and available everywhere you get your podcast in audio format, or whether you watch us on YouTube. We appreciate you so much. Broncos country, through the wins and the losses, we have you covered here, Locked On Broncos. Sayre, my friend, injuries once again, a storyline, not just for the Denver Broncos, but I'd say widespread in the last couple of weeks, and even in week 4 specifically, all across the National Football League. Injuries have become a huge issue at the forefront as to what's going on with the National Football League. None bigger so far than the guys that we've mentioned, and that is Javonte Williams suffered the knee injury in the third quarter to open things up, was on crutches, and will have to get an MRI. We'll find out the extent, but initially the belief is that it is expected to be a serious injury. There is hope, though. You never know with an MRI. It could look one way, and you hope that the MRI reveals that it's not as serious as the initial fear is. That is a tremendous blow for the Broncos. Randy Gregory, knee injury as well, will get an MRI. If the Broncos lose him, you can expect to see a lot of Bradley Chubb and Baron Browning. We even saw rookie Nick Bonito getting in the mix a little bit as well. And Aaron Patrick, another outside linebacker, suffered a concussion and will have to go through protocol, which puts his status for Thursday likely in question. We'll talk about the ripple effects of that throughout the week here, Locked On Broncos. But then we talked about it as well. P.J. Locke going down in the very first play with a concussion. More than likely, that could hold him out of Thursday's action against the Colts as well. Sayre, the banged-up Broncos right now, licking their wounds here at 2-2.
They are, Cody. I mean, we were fortunate to come away from that San Francisco game relatively unscathed. I know Baron Browning was one of the guys who got hurt in that game. He ended up playing against the Raiders, so no big deal there. The good news on the injury front, though, is that we should be seeing potentially Greg Dulcich this week, Michael Ojemudia. We'll see where Quinn Miners and Billy Turner are at. I know there was kind of setbacks there this past week, but man, I mean, it could be like the Mighty Ducks getting to join up with the All-Stars from all across the country in D2, you know, when District 5 teamed up with them to form Team USA. So, I mean, that could be the Broncos against the Indianapolis Colts, just getting fortified all over the board. But absolutely, these are huge injuries. I think the Broncos are much more well-equipped right now. I mean, maybe this is surprising, but to handle the loss of Randy Gregory with Baron Browning and Nick Bonito off the edge, I feel like you're more well-equipped there than you are at running back, where there's serious concerns to me, Cody, about Melvin Gordon and even somewhat with Mike Boone in terms of the opportunities that he got to make some plays in the passing game against the Raiders in this game, and just couldn't come down with the ball. And neither of these guys proving reliable. Mike Boone was out there for a big sack on Russell Wilson, missed a pass pro assignment, at least from my vantage point. Maybe I'm wrong about that. But I think, to me, Cody, you have a much easier time replacing Randy Gregory in terms of the guys that you have on the roster right now than you do Javonte Williams, who, I mean, maybe not averaging the greatest yards per carry against the Raiders, but certainly a big piece of the offense and somebody that the Broncos have come to lean on.
Well, and that's going to be a huge question. What do the Denver Broncos do at the running back position? It is expected Javonte will miss some time, but as the points that you just made right there, how do the Broncos overcome that? Well, Broncos country, tomorrow's episode, Lockdown Broncos, we're going to have a bonus episode for you on Monday morning for your commute to work where we talk about the running back position. It's a little bit of a shorter episode. We take a look at in-house options. We take a look at options outside on the free agency market, but the Broncos will need to find solutions. They'll need to find it fast because the offense, getting the run game going is important, and that's what Broncos head coach Nathaniel Hackett told us in his post-game press conference. The run game is a huge part. It makes up the identity of the Broncos offense, and so if you take that away, it's going to make it easier for opposing defenses to play you. But I will leave Broncos country with this. Let's highlight some of the key positives of this game to take away. I felt that Montreal Washington did a fantastic job on Sunday, Sayre, of giving the Broncos great field position. 3 times he had returns that brought them to midfield. He had 3 punt returns for a total of 66 total yards. Good blocking on the special team side there. Now, the question is, what do the Broncos do going forward? Can they capitalize on that? Because several times, he had those returns, the offense went backwards, and that is a big concern that needs to be addressed a little bit later on this week. But also, I was able to ask Russell Wilson, how do you rally the guys after a loss like this, a short turnaround to prepare for an opponent like the Indianapolis Colts? And he said, we've got to respond and we've got to battle. We've got to overcome obstacles, and we can't be afraid to do. He said that's what championship-type teams do. They can't shy away from the challenge. And so, you know what? The Broncos are still in this Broncos country. I know the loss to the Raiders is a negative. They're 2-2 on the season so far. They still have a chance. It's still early on in the season. They're going to have to fix some things along the way. But this means the season is not over, contrary to some of the comments, some of the tweets that we've been getting on social media. The season is not officially over yet, and I understand it doesn't look very promising, Broncos country. But you know what? Football is a weird game as we see it change every single week. Can the Broncos get it going? That is a big question. Make sure you check out the bonus episode, Lockdown Broncos, as we address maybe what the Broncos should do at the running back position. We'll catch you tomorrow for a brand new episode of the show after we hear from Broncos head coach Nathaniel Hackett. We'll get an update on the injury statuses of Javonte Williams and Randy Gregory.